I'm Carrie Wise, founder of JoyfulDVM, veterinarian and certified life coach, and today I want to talk about keeping score in our lives. This is what many of us do this on a day-to-day basis. We're keeping score on how our lives are going. And it comes with one of the most common questions that we ask and that we reflect on, which was, how was our day? Did we have a good day or did we have a bad day? Most of us, if we're asked how was our day, we're going to come back and we're going to answer with either good or bad. What we don't recognize is that in defining our day as either good or bad, we're also kind of defining it as either winning or losing. And that negative side of it has us believing that things are going wrong. So as we consider how we're keeping this mental tally of wins and losses, of good and bad, throughout all the experiences of our lives, what we miss is the impact that that has on the results that we want to create moving forward. The problem is that we believe that when things are bad, that they're going wrong, right? That the bad days, the negative, is something to be avoided. And what's the big deal with it? That's one question I think that we should ask ourselves more often. Like, what really is so bad about the bad day? What is so bad about any undesired outcome? Something that doesn't go the way that we expected it would go. It only comes down to one thing, and that's the way that we feel. The reason that we don't like it when things don't go the way that we expect them to go or that we want them to go is because it creates a negative feeling. It creates an emotion that we don't want to experience. And for many of us, if we would consider what is it that we felt that led us to label that experience as good or bad, particularly bad, what is it that led us to label that experience as bad? Why was that? What were we feeling? And in most of us, we would come back with things like feeling embarrassed or feeling ashamed or feeling disappointed. So what's the big deal about that? Like, why are we so unwilling to feel that? What is it that we make experiencing embarrassment or shame or disappointment mean? For many of us, it's just all coming from this awareness, this acute awareness of our own inadequacy. Something happens. We attempt something, it doesn't turn out the way that we thought it would, and we feel very inadequate in that moment. We're just acutely aware of our inability in that moment, and we think it should be different. We think that if we were doing it right, that we would have been successful, that it would have gone well, that we would have had a different outcome. And the problem is that the inadequacy itself, the failures, the things that don't turn out the right way, they're actually not a problem, but we believe that they are a problem. And that leads us to then retract from our lives. So we try something and we experience something. Let me kind of go back. We look at our day. How was your day yesterday? Good or bad? And we're like, it was a bad day. Okay, why was it a bad day? We're going to be able to come up with reasons why. If we look at those reasons why, at the heart of that is something that we believe should have gone differently than it did. Something perhaps that we should have been able to do differently. Somewhere where we are inadequate or that the situation was inadequate. That inadequacy is creating other emotions, embarrassment, shame, disappointment. And we don't like to feel that way. And so we want to adjust things so that we don't feel those feelings, so that we don't feel embarrassed or ashamed or disappointed or inadequate, because we believe the inadequacy is a problem. What happens when we are looking at our lives through that lens is that we retract. We pull back from our lives, and this shows up in all kinds of different ways. Some of the most common ways that we retract from our lives because we're interpreting the discomfort as something going terribly wrong and we don't want to continue to feel discomfort. One of the ways that these show up is in things like leaving. So like we leave jobs or we leave relationships. We also avoid. So maybe we avoid cases, or maybe we avoid difficult conversations in the future. And then also there are just things that we never try. So pretty much anything that we think that there's a pretty high potential that we would not be good at or that we would fail at, we just don't try it at all. And we only do this because of the negative emotion, because we're interpreting the negative way that we felt as something going wrong, as it being a problem, as a loss in the tally of life. We're interpreting life as either good or bad, wins or losses. And when we maintain that kind of perspective, we really miss out on three key concepts that would help us move forward and move through it to create lives that we actually want. The first one, the first concept that we miss, when we continue to evaluate our lives as either good or bad, or in the days as either like wins or losses, the key concept that we miss there is that life is 50-50 positive and negative by design. The negative doesn't mean that anything's going wrong. The negative is just part of our experience. And for us in veterinary medicine, I think this is easier to grasp because we understand the whole concept of homeostasis, of keeping things in balance. There needs to be positive and negative for homeostasis to exist, and all living beings and everything that has any kind of life to it always tries to get back to homeostasis when it's out of whack. So we can see the value of the negative, and we can look through it scientifically. And now if we can just apply that to ourselves in our own emotional state and recognize that perhaps the negative actually is intentional and has a purpose, then it becomes easier to accept. It doesn't have to mean something is going terribly wrong. So that's the first key concept that we miss when we maintain the perspective that feeling bad, experiencing a negative emotion, means something's wrong, that we're doing it wrong, that it's not something we should try to do, to experience, be willing to experience. The second key that we miss here is that there are no losses. So good day, bad day, if we're looking at the tally, many of us will just go ahead and say win or lose, right? Won one, lost one. But what if there are actually no losses? There's actually just wins and there are lessons. And I know that on some level that you actually already understand this, because when you think about anything skill-based that you've gone to try to learn, whenever you haven't done it right, you haven't gotten the outcome that you wanted the first time, you've tried again. And as I was considering this and thinking of an example, the one that popped up to me is kind of a funny one, but I was thinking about back in vet school when I was trying to learn to do sutures. And I know for my veterinarians and my veterinary technicians, like that is something that you all learn as part of your education, is how to throw suture knots, right? And I was thinking about the difference in a square knot versus a granny knot. Because many of us, when we first start throwing surgical knots, we start tying granny knots. And those aren't the right way, right? They're not going to hold. They're not the desired outcome. We want to do square knots. And so what if the first time that we threw a suture, like a knot, we threw a granny knot, and we recognized it was a granny knot, it wasn't what we wanted to do, and we just decided, nah, I'm just never going to do sutures again. Like, it seems kind of silly, right? Like, there's really not very high stakes, if you will, when you're just trying to throw knots on a sponge or a, orange or whatever you were using as your media there to throw knots over. But many of us, when we're experiencing something and we're learning something and we're moving forward to do something, as soon as we get an outcome that we didn't expect, we just quit. Somehow when it's skill-based, when you have that tangible means to evaluate your progress, like the knot is either a granny knot or a square knot, one is right, one is wrong. When we have that black and white means of evaluation, many of us are willing to keep going, to keep trying. But when we don't, which is pretty much life in general, right? Then the only way that we have to evaluate whether it's going right or wrong is through emotion. It's completely skewed, by the way, but that's just what we do. And that's why we label anything that creates that experience of a negative emotion as bad or wrong.